Welcome everyone to Reinforce. My name is Bridget Johnson, and today we're here to talk about build and scale security-first engineering culture. I am joined by Kristen Hott, who is a senior security engineering manager. We actually both work in AWS identity, so you might be questioning yourself, like, why are you all fit to talk about culture, security culture specifically? Well, we thought this was a little good 1-2 punch. So I am a director in AWS Identity. I own a bunch of identity systems, products you all use, hopefully. And so you want my engineers to be very security first minded. So that's great. So I'll talk about my experience as an engineering leader and bringing that culture to those systems. But Kristen here, you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. So up until January of this year, I was in AWS security. So spent a lot of time working in AppSec, working on programs like our Guardians program, to where we're developing engineers across the organization to think about security. But I was always in that I am a central security team member mindset until recently, where I've moved into the identity organization and manage a team of security engineers that support a number of different identity and governance services. One of the organizations that we support is Bridget. So I've been amazed by the culture that Bridget has instilled in her organization. I have. So I'll share kind of like those two different mindsets that I've had of working within a security organization and then coming into a developer organization. So
the coolest part is, since we've been working together for a while now, we get to share some stories. So speaking of stories, we're gonna introduce our engineer for the next hour. His name is Pickles. He is also my horse.
How many of y'all have an engineer on your teams named Pickles?
No, maybe there might be a team mascot. And so if you're bored, you can just count how many times we say Pickles throughout the presentation, keep you on your toes. But let's talk about Pickles. So Pickles, the engineer, was working on a new feature. You know, he's coding away with his hooves and whatever how he codes, and he was vibe coding maybe. And then he discovers that his service is writing social security numbers to the logs. He's like, that's probably not good, but I got this feature, it's not that great, or like, I got this feature, the security issue's not that great. Security will probably fix it, you know, those security people will come in and fix it. It's a Friday afternoon, I don't want to report it, that seems like a lot of work. So hopefully you all cringed when you heard that story, like a lot on the insides. And you're like, well, that's not the right story. The right story is that Pickles is working even if it's on a Friday afternoon. He identifies the issue. He follows clear steps to report the issue. Him and his team get engaged. Maybe some experts get engaged. They assess the impact. They assess the risk. They work to mitigate the risk. And then at the end of the day, Pickles gets a carrot and we all celebrate, right? That feels a lot better. And this is what happens in a strong security-first engineering culture.
So let's talk more about how we get there. We're going to kind of cover a few different things during this session. We're going to get started with just like who is involved, probably a lot of the people in this room today. We're going to break it down into this flywheel that I think really accentuates what a security-first culture looks like and how it gains momentum and continues to sustain itself over time. We're going to talk about empowering engineers to identify security risks and figuring out how do you move from just like fixing things that are identified to driving systemic change so that these things don't happen again. And then we're going to talk about the impact. What does this all mean? Why do we care about it? And then give you some tips on how to get started in your own organizations. So there's a few different key personas involved. One, you guessed it, it's the engineers. How many of you are engineers in this room?
All right, we got some.
Awesome. Good. Obviously incredibly core to the culture of a security-first engineering culture, but also the security people. How many of you are in a security or compliance or audit function within your companies?
Okay, we got the mix.
Awesome. Okay, but it doesn't stop there. It also is the leaders of the company. How many of you are in a leadership role within your organization? Awesome. And then it's the business stakeholders as well, incredibly important. How many of you have a business role within your company? Awesome. Okay, every single one of you plays a role in building this culture. So what does it look like for each of those different personas? So our engineers in the room, these are the people that we want who are day in and day out building these applications, writing new code. We want them identifying security issues, and we want them prioritizing them. And that means being able to find them. within whatever they might be doing on a given day, whatever applications that they own. Then there's the security persona. So these people are, it's really important that they're able to clearly articulate what the security expectations are. I think that oftentimes is missed, where a security persona comes in and says, hey, I'm going to go and help do these security things, when in actuality, really start by focusing on what are the expectations that you have and the standards that you can set to make it easier for them to achieve those outcomes.
Well, even in AWS, we have AWS security expectations, and they're published and updated yearly, so all of them know about it.
Exactly. Then we have the leaders. So important that leaders are aware of these security risks and celebrating them when they're identified. And then the business personas, these are the people that really need to be regularly engaging on these risks, not just like saying, hey, they've got this, they'll take care of it, like asking questions about what the risk is, what the impact is, and inspecting the progress of fixes that are identified.
But how do you get it going?
So this is our flywheel. We're going to use this throughout the presentation to kind of talk around core components of building this culture. It starts on the left, you'll see identify. It really starts with identifying, but we've placed this where it is because it is kind of an uphill battle to identify risks. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about different tools and mechanisms that you can put in place to encourage engineers to do this. And then it's celebrating. And we have celebrating there up at the top because if you do it right and you do it consistently, that's where you start to build your momentum. And that enables engineers to be able to address the risk in the right way, and then leading to systemic change, which is really important in order to prevent these risks from reemerging over time. And then we have this sub-flywheel with experience and accountability, and as these engineers gain more experience with identifying and addressing risks, and you inject accountability where it's needed, it'll help that flywheel gain more and more momentum.
And whether you're just getting started or you have systems in place already for your security-first engineering culture, adding more investment, leadership time and attention, more juju into any of these buckets will continue to spin the flywheel. So that's the goal.
It's all about the juju.
It's all about the juju, in my words. All right, so when we talk about identifying security risks, this is the first one. The biggest bang for your buck is to get the engineering teams to self-identify risk. And so we're gonna spend a lot of time here today. But the number one thing to help with this is to make it easy, predictable, and a little bit boring for them to report potential security risks. And I use that term potential very intentionally. If they feel a wobble, they're a little nervous, it should be a no-op situation, cut the ticket, get the right people involved to assess if it is. If it's not, great, ticket get closed, everybody moves on with their day. And if it is a security risk, then the right people get brought in to mitigate and assess and all of the things. To make this real, like you can have easy tickets all day long, but if you do not celebrate when engineers self-report security risks, we're gonna talk about this a lot, you're not gonna get them to self-identify. You have to encourage that behavior time and time again. And then one thing that I found has helped a lot in my organizations is security risks can be a little bit scary. They can be overwhelming. They can make somebody a little bit anxious. And so bringing in high judgment individuals who have seen scenarios like this before is a really, really good path to make sure the engineering teams feel supported throughout their, if they identify risk. Okay, so we talked about engineering teams self-identifying risks. This is really, really important. But obviously you're gonna have security tools that detect risks. Please try to make these available to the engineers as much as possible, rather than a central security team seeing all these things and being like, bang, fix it, right? Make them available, put them available into their tools that they're already using, their pipelines, their code analysis tools, their reporting, their tickets, whatever you got going on. And then the third bucket we also have is externally discovered risks. Now, hopefully you find so much in the first bucket that the last one is a little small, but they do happen. And realize that they happen from more than one place. They're not just always formally submitted by a customer who wants to do, like, there's bug bounties and all that, but they also pop up on social media platforms, blogs that are written, video blogs, all the things where somebody's like, this is weird. We, in AWS, find those, and we actually cut the internal tickets so we can do the investigation to see if it's real or not. And then when you do engage with a customer, foster a seek and understand to kind of understand where the customer is at, what they were trying to do, the inputs and outputs.
So I've often in my career heard things like, we can't have a security engineer on every team, Kristen. Or
we
can't, you don't, that's right. We can't train them all to be security experts. And security should be security's job. Has anyone ever heard any of these things before in their conversations? Yeah.
I see a lot of nodding heads.
Those are things that we hear often, and they're all honestly really valid thoughts. But we're going to debunk those throughout this presentation because they don't need to be blockers in this.
We're gonna bust those myths. All right, so setting up engineering teams to self-identify, I want to drive home the point that it has to happen at every point of the development lifecycle. So starting at product design, you got to be asking questions, break our mindset. How can a bad actor exploit this new change, this new feature we're launching, this change in the system? In tech design and reviews, have your security teams review it, or have somebody who's just has a good security mindset, asking, are we verifying the inputs? Are we inspecting our assumptions? In my organization, we have a design doc, and it's a template. And there is a specific part about assumptions, and then there's a specific part about the security nature of those assumptions. And so calling it out explicitly really trains your engineers to be on the lookout early in the process. And then yes, you'll have automated tests, you'll have tooling to kind of identify, so to make sure that all those assumptions that you were going after are actually valid, and you're verifying the inputs into your system. That is, when we went out and asked a bunch of our security engineers, we said, what's the number one thing you want to tell customers about our security first engineering culture? They're like, verify inputs. Every input into your system should be verified. That was our number one thing. And then hopefully, if you've done your homework earlier in the process, your security reviews should go pretty seamless. And I would actually say, like, that's the case with a lot of my features. We go out, or a lot of updates to our system. Our security reviews are boring. We don't find a lot of new things, and that's a good thing because we've done it early and thought about it.
So regardless of what your software development lifecycle looks like, product design, test design, reviews, like, whatever that is, take these 3 things and figure out how you inject it into a step within each of those things. And if you do that, it'll be an incredible first start at this new culture.
And then when an engineer self-identifies a security risk or a security issue, the key ingredient is to celebrate. Pizza and champagne works, but emails also work.
The key ingredient, or just Bridget's favorite?
It's my favorite.
Champagne and pizza.
But so we have a security review meeting every week, and when we review an issue and it's self-identified, we hear the VPs say, hey, who identified that? And everyone's like, whoa. And then they're like, no, send an email. This is great. Kudos to them, right? And so what happens is the manager usually kicks off an email with the employee on, and the VPs are just like, great job, great job, great job. You can see some here, or Slack messages, lots of kudos. If you are a leader and you're responding to one of these, please try to make it as specific as possible. I did have one pop up the other day, and just like Pickles, it was a Friday night, and the engineer did report an issue, and it was real, and I actually called out, thank you for reporting on a Friday. And he was like, yeah, that was scary, right? But you got to encourage that behavior to always report it if you see something.
That was a fun animation that I didn't know was about to happen. So I'm not going to spend too much time on tooling, but the reason I wanted to have this slide is because these are the 5 key areas where you want to make sure you have tooling, because it will help you identify risks within certain key spaces. So look at these, and there are presentations across Reinforce on each of these different topics. And ask yourself if you have tooling that fits within these buckets. And then the last one is less about tooling and more about a pen testing framework. A lot of people think like, oh, I must hire like a pen tester or an external contractor to do pen testing for me, but actually engineers are the best pen testers. And if you give an engineer some time to go and break some stuff, they're gonna figure out how to break it. And that's the best thing that you want to happen. So I'm not going to harp on this too much, but I just wanted to have this so that you could look into where you have the tools to enable engineers.
All right, and I'll put a plug in for access control gaps because I own Access Analyzer. I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. And so if you haven't checked out Access Analyzer, definitely do it. It can help.
So we can demystify or demythify You must have security tooling to find security risks and issues. I know I just talked about the tools, but you definitely do not need security tools in order to find stuff. These engineers who work on these applications day in and day out and know this code better than anyone else are best positioned to be able to find things. And going back to that breaker mindset and inspecting assumptions and inputs is the best place for them to start, to be able to say, what would I have expected to be put into this system? And if it doesn't come through in the way I expected, what are all those ways? And then what happens? What gets returned when I do that? So you don't need the tools, right? They're great for driving systemic change, which we'll talk about later, but you don't need them to identify issues. Another myth that I hear often, I could have a whole conversation. I should actually do a reinforced presentation on the common myths, but I often hear engineers say there's very little risk associated with non-production systems, and I'm sure anyone who's been in the security space for long enough has had a scenario where we didn't properly protect a non-production system, and an attacker used that as a pathway to get into the production system. This scares me all the time, and it's something we inspect as a security team a lot. So don't have a bad day because you didn't think about this or you had engineers think that it's non-prod, it's not important, let's spend our time in the prod space.
You just made our audience cringe for a second time. So
I know,
racking
sorry.
them up here.
I'm sorry. Okay, so this is kind of just a high-level overview, where are the different ways or mechanisms where you can find issues. Threat modeling, if you're going to start anywhere, have your engineers threat model, but don't overemphasize the how-to of a threat model. Just have them think about, what am I building, what could go wrong, and how do I address it? Start there. Code review, using code analysis tools. AI is making it a lot easier for us to do these kind of code reviews, but really important to look at that. And then dynamic analysis, doing that pen testing on a regular basis, and then adding these automated security checks into your pipeline. And then the red one is the one that we all don't love, but it is the customers, the disclosures, the external researchers that oftentimes can find things. But if we can shift left, if anyone's ever heard that term before, even in the identifying risk space, we will be in a better place. So now we have all these issues.
You've got a lot of issues.
Done an amazing job. This is just a screenshot actually from Threat Composer. Shout out to Threat Composer. It's an open source threat modeling tool. And you can go and use it, and it's just a really simplified framework for engineers to be able to enter threats and ask questions that you want them to ask. But
Right.
you have all of these threats, so what do we do now?
Are you stressed out a little bit by now because you have all these threats and you're just like, what do I do? You have all these issues. So we've identified a lot, and that should be an ongoing place. The key theme here is that you're going to actually use the security issues that you find to spur the rest of it, right? You're going to use it to address them, and you're going to use it to make systemic change, and you're going to use it to encourage the engineers to keep doing it, right? And that's where that flywheel really happens. So let's talk about, so you have all these security issues, and then you have to address them. We actually struggled with the word address, because it's like, do you mitigate them? What if it's not a security issue? Do you prioritize them? And then we've kind of figured out addressing the security issue, and what does that mean? So what it means is you've got to articulate the risk. And every time you're articulating the risk, everybody put their doctor hat on. They are a doctor. They need to be super clinical. They need to talk about clearly documented behaviors and outcomes. So for example, an individual with an account and knowledge of a bucket name can read the contents. A lot of times in this step is where security issues start to get amplified, a lot of scary words added, and so we like to remind everybody to be super clinical. Then you assess the risk, so determine the risk of it, the urgency, are there customers impacted, what is the perception risk, sometimes that goes out there too. And so anyone can get access to your carrot sales data and horse PII. Like that is not okay, right? Like we can't have our horses PII out there letting them know, I don't know what horse PII, what colors they are or something. And then you prioritize next steps. There's always this debate between long-term and short-term. Number one thing, and I'll repeat it, is like go mitigate. Get a team to go mitigate as fast as possible. Get a team to be assessing the impact. They should not be the same team, right? Going two separate, or they shouldn't be the same people. They can be on the same team. And then track action. Any long-term thinking, as a leader, you should be saying things Let's deal with that after we've mitigated the issue or we've gotten a hold of the mitigation. Let's think about that later, right? You want people focused on the actual steps to mitigate the issue. So when we talk about articulating the risks, is where you're going to put your doctor hat on. If you watch TV, you got to be really clinical. And one way to always force this is use threat language. So what are the prerequisites? What's the threat source? In my previous example, they have an AWS account. They have knowledge of the bucket. Can threat action, can read the context, which can lead to threat impact, getting access to horse PII data, and negatively impact our horse customers. Be clinical and specific. This helps you figure out where to drive the mitigations. It helps you prioritize, right? Because you know exactly what the inputs are. You know exactly what the action they can take. And then the other thing this really helps with security issues, you're constantly pulling in people, right? Like, oh, we need somebody from this service. We need somebody from this other team. We need legal now, right? And if you have clearly articulated the risk, it is so much easier for those people to get caught up to speed. If you've ever been part of a security issue and every time somebody joins the call, they're like, what's the issue again? No, write it down. Somebody just laughed, so that means that they've been in that situation. No, write it down, put it in the ticket or whatever tracking system you have. Make sure it's super clear, be a doctor, and articulate the risk.
The other thing I see happen all the time that I'm sure y'all can relate to is engineers come to you with an issue and they say, I found this and I have this idea, this is how I'm thinking of fixing it, and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not solution this yet. Just like, let's figure out what has happened and what the issue is. So I always try and, ensure that they're thinking about how to articulate it before they do anything else. The other thing I wanted to call out too is when you're thinking about how do I enable these engineers to report the risk, make sure to not establish a culture of when they report it that they are then responsible for going out and owning the fix or like having to do all of this paperwork or questioning or whatever to dive into it. Like, I think that is one place where I've seen people go wrong with trying to build this culture out. Because that then is just going to discourage the engineer to do it. They're not going to want to do it because then they're going to be on the hook for stuff. So just don't fall into that pit. And make it really easy for them to assess the risk. So if you do need to get information from them, how do you get it from them in the quickest way? We'll have a really set, simple framework for getting the information that you need or that the organization would need in order to go dive into it and figure out what the right path forward is. This is a screenshot actually from our security tool internally. We ask the exact same questions every single time a risk is reported, and we articulate those, but here's the thing. It will change over time as you dive into the issue and as you learn more. And so make it something that can be updated and evolves and have that be the central place where everyone goes to learn about what is happening. Because I think the changing of information can oftentimes create confusion and frustration and churn that you don't want when you're trying to solve an issue, fix it as fast as possible. So Bridget alluded to something earlier, our weekly security meeting. So at AWS, you might have heard of the weekly security meeting in a previous presentation. And this started, over 10 years ago since I've been here. And it was started by Andy Jassy. He said, I want to know what are the security issues that are happening across the company. And he said, I want to know about it regularly. So he established what we call the weekly security meeting. Every single Friday, him and our CISO, Steve Schmidt at the time, would meet along with the engineering owners of whatever security issue they're reviewing that week. This has grown into something that each individual engineering organization also conducts weekly on their own, and our VP is there every single week. My team owns that weekly security meeting. Jamie Angel's in the room. I saw her earlier. She's helping with questions. She leads one for our database and AI services. And it's a really important and valuable mechanism for not only getting the leaders engaged in understanding the security issues, in going into the depths of the tech to understand what happened. But it's also a really great way to efficiently get the right stakeholders and really smart, unique, differing perspectives together to make sure that you're solving these difficult security challenges in the right way. So we have it every single week. In that meeting, you'll see we have just a very simplified agenda. And you don't see it in the picture I put, but in our table, discovered by is one of the first fields in there. So we always know who the engineer was who discovered it. And then
as an engineering leader, I use this meeting because I'm like, great, I have all these people in the room, let's make decisions. So if we're figuring out a priority decision, or if we go option A or option B, I actually use it to drive decisions because I have all the right people there already.
Yep, that's awesome. And then we use those metrics, like the discovered by metrics, to say, are we increasing the number of times engineers are identifying things or internal teams are identifying things versus us finding out through a customer or a bug bounty or an external researcher. So it's a great metric for you to use to measure kind of the progress you're making. So a real life example of how this weekly security meeting can add a lot of value is recently, we learned about an overly permissive console policy within a service that an engineer had reported. We looked into that within our normal SecOps response process. The engineering team identified a fix. That all happened between like the few days of it being reported and the weekly security meeting. We then came and reviewed it in the weekly security meeting. And one of the security engineers in the room at that time said, well, what about this? And it was realized like the fix that they had implemented actually wasn't as comprehensive as we were expecting it to be. So it was a great way for them to really poke at all of the different access paths and issues with that policy. We then the service team went and updated that fix so that it could be more robust. And that kind of shows the value of that kind of mechanism.
And then that brings us to our next point, which is the systemic change, right? So you can address the issue, you can fix it, but then you're gonna ask yourself, how do we make sure this doesn't reoccur either in this system or across all the other systems? And this is where it all connects. Without this step, you're just gonna have a lot of security issues and a lot of addressing. You need to go back and ask for the long-term systemic change. And what that looks like, and we ask this a lot in our weekly security meeting, what other services can be impacted by this risk? Do we need a correction of error, which is a little bit longer format to kind of dive into why this happened, how it happened, what other systems have the same pattern, which then brings you to action items. Is there tooling that needs to be updated? Are there mechanisms that need to be updated to make sure that nobody has the same whoopsie, right? And so the goal is if you discover a security risk, is that all systems around you don't discover that same one, or if they've discovered they have it too, they have a good path to remediate it. And we have this debate a lot in that weekly security meeting of central ownership versus distributed ownership. Should this be a central team building a tool to make this easy? Should this be updated to our existing tooling, or should this be on the team that owns the system? And we try to make it as easy as possible so that we hopefully can avoid a campaign of like, hey, everybody, go do this one action in your code. But sometimes it does happen where we need a campaign, and we have to say, okay, how do we make this as easy as possible for everybody to update? I'm sure you've all lived through some campaigns, especially if you were around in, what was that, 2020? There's some security issues that everybody was front and center for. But be vigilant for issues that can have cascading impacts, and always ask yourself the question, what other services could be impacted by the same pattern? It doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but the pattern really matters here. So what you'd want to do
is, in this situation, we, as part of that weekly security meeting, said, okay, how are we going to prevent new policies, new console policies from having the same overly permissive actions that it had in it? And obviously we said, well, let's just block those. Why would we even allow those policies to have them? Well, there are exceptions and extenuating circumstances, which I'm sure that you all experience. And so that's why we hadn't blocked it to begin with. And so then we decided to leverage Access Analyzer, actually, to go and assess all the existing sign-in policies to determine where there might be other issues similar to what we had already identified with different actions. And sure enough, it found a couple that we really needed to look into, which then started that flywheel over where we went through what's the best way to lock down those policies to meet the needs of the customers. So
I once had a boss that said, never let a good security issue go to waste, right? And so if there's something you've been trying to push through your organization and you're like, oh, if we had just changed that, if there's a security risk that actually gets surfaced about it, use it to implement the long-term change. It is the best way to get something done.
But it's a delicate balance.
It's a delicate
because
balance.
As someone in security, I don't ever want to be perceived as someone who is...
You can't do it all the time, but you can do it sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, so we've completed our first flywheel. So we've identified, we've celebrated like crazy. Pickles got all the carrots. We've addressed our issues. Maybe some of them we found weren't issues. Some of them we did. We've made the systemic changes, but there's more. And so we hear this myth a lot.
Engineers need robust security training and knowledge. Well, I beg to differ. I think that there truly is no compression algorithm for experience in this space. And because security is quite ambiguous at times and scary, and there's risks involved and a lot of stakeholders, engineers are wobbly about it, and they don't like dealing with it because it comes with all this other stuff, and it just takes experience and being involved. And so I always, as I ran the Guardians program, I always got questions about like, well, what training do you give them? And I say, I invest in giving them experience, because at the end of the day, we could spend hundreds of hours and dollars trying to build the best e-learning course you've ever had in your life. But it doesn't get you nearly as far as getting them experience. And that's another value of that weekly security meeting, because they get to come and hear how we talk about these issues, and learn the questions that are being asked in the areas that we're poking so that they can continuously get better and improve over time.
And so as a leader, your job is to make sure you're pulling in people continuously so that they gain experience, or they use their experience to help somebody else gain experience. And so, hey, Dan, you were helpful guiding this one team. We have a similar issue. Can you come in? Hey, Danny, as our team security engineer, that's kind of mapped to our team, help us calibrate this risk. And then he walks through it with my team and gets them to understand, so the next time they can do it on their own, or it's a little bit faster. Also realize a lot of your engineers have this knack and interest and desire to understand security more, to get better at it. Foster that, encourage it. I've had multiple engineers on my team go from engineer, building systems, all the things, and slowly they migrated their way over to be a security engineer just because they got curious and they learned. And so do foster that, because it just helps. If an engineer knows the systems and they have a lot of experience with security, it's just like, it's so good for your systems. It's so good for your security culture.
And create a community for those individuals, whether it's through a formal program like the Guardians program. If you haven't heard of what that program is, it's similar to a Champions program. At AWS, as we started to grow so rapidly, over 5 years ago now at this point, we had a long line of teams that wanted to go through an AppSec review, because they have to go through an AppSec review before they can launch. And we kept running into these issues where it's like they're saying, you're not moving fast enough, AppSec. And so we said, well, why are we not moving fast enough? And it was because the teams that were coming to us, ready for a security review, ready for launch, weren't ready at all. They hadn't thought about security in the way that they needed to ensure that they were ready to deliver something and ship something to our customers in a way that would keep them secure. And so we said, we've got to do something about it. And so what we said is we need to develop engineers, software engineers on every single two-pizza team to understand and think about and bring up, most importantly, bring up security throughout every step of the process. So that's our community. I think we have a lot of different resources online, and I actually did a talk earlier today going into more depths with this with another customer who built their own program. So you can learn some tips from there, but if I were just going to give you any tip, if that's something that you're considering doing, just start very small and specific and enable those engineers who get involved to communicate and learn from each other and talk about that one small specific thing. So for example, threat modeling. You could say, I want this person on this engineering team to help their team threat model every single time, and give them a feedback mechanism for that one specific activity, and go from there.
It also goes into the product design and tech design, right? So you have a security guardian. This is how we use them early and often so that it's not so last minute.
Exactly. And then foster that sharing of information. We talked earlier about the security persona and how it's really important for them to set consistent standards and expectations across the company. I think the hardest challenge is like those may change, or they might live in a number of different systems, whether they're a policy or a standard or best practices. Just give your engineers one central place to get that information, because if it's too hard to find stuff, they're not going to go looking for it anymore. So that's just my tip.
Favorite part of this slide, I don't know if anyone can see it, but the little bar at the bottom, this is from one of our wikis, and I went there to take a screenshot, and look what it says in yellow. Report an incident. One click. I'm Pickles, it's Friday night, something's wonky, report an incident, right? It's at the top of almost all of our security wiki pages.
But it all leads to one very simple intake form.
Very simple intake form.
And that intake form actually goes into the system that I have some screenshots on here, where every single security issue that gets reported has action items associated with it. It sounds super obvious, but these action items need to have owners, estimated completion dates, and an escalation mechanism for if they aren't met. And that accountability is really important, because we can spend a lot of time in security diving deep into what's the right thing to do, what's the right path forward, what's the right fix. There's 5 different fixes. Which one are we going to do? You can invest in that and then forget to do this one important piece to drive accountability. And a lot of that time spent will unfortunately be lost, because a lot of things are happening all the time, and you have to have a way to inspect the work that's being done over time to fix an issue.
And the action items range from what is the specific mitigation to making sure we get accurate numbers on customer impact to long-term plans. And sometimes the action item won't be the long-term plan. It'll actually be like, go figure out the long-term plan. Yeah. And it might have a hypothesis in there. And as a leader, one thing to make sure is like, this accountability is very helpful for me, right? Because we're in a security issue, we're gonna focus on mitigation, we're gonna spin up another team to get the impact, and I know this thing is waiting for me at the end to be like, okay, we will solve the long-term problem once we kind of get through the initial risk and mitigate.
Will you tell us what your oarfish is real quick though?
My what?
Your oarfish. What's this other picture on the screen? I want you to talk about your Hot Topics meeting real fast.
Oh, okay. I was like, what are we talking about?
It's your doc.
So we have security issues, but there's also long-running things where you want to get better, right? Maybe you want to scrub your logs, or maybe you want to reduce your long-term keys, or there's a whole slew of things where you just know you want to get better. And so every 2 weeks, I review with my teams. I call it Security Hot Topics. And this meeting serves 2 purposes. One, so we have a list of all the places we know we want to move and improve our security bar. And I have managers as well as our principal engineers in there, and sometimes some senior engineers as well. And we review it. The other thing this meeting's for is if there's something hot and we have to make a decision, a priority decision, a get moving decision, an option decision, we use that meeting as well. And that's really, really powerful.
One of my favorite things, I'll join that meeting, and sometimes I'll be running late from another, and I'll jump in, and like Bridget's already like 8 feet deep into some issue. Oh, yeah. And I'm like, I love it though, because although she is a leader of many, many engineering teams, she is deep in the tech, and she is asking questions to understand what's happening, why it happened, what the different options are. And I think that engagement from a security perspective from her as a leader is really, really impactful.
Never discount the power of leadership, time, and attention. It will get the right things done. All right, so we've completed our double flywheel. But let's talk about how this actually lights up in your world. So this is a week in the life of Bridget. And so you can see my calendar. This is not my complete calendar. I wish it was this clear. But these are all the security-related items on my calendar. So you can see that weekly security meeting that we talked about. You can see my hot topics meeting that we talked about. Oh, by the way, I do an operational review where kind of security trend. This is where all our tooling items get reported in the operational review. Oh, and then we have a monthly roadmap meeting. This is where we also summarize what we're doing to improve our security bar. Then you can see there's this pickles issue, and it's 3 times that week. And this is what we do. We stand up both a Slack channel and a standing meeting until that issue is complete and we know the path forward. And so I will join a meeting every other day to make sure the teams are moving in the right way, we have the right risk calibration, we have the right urgency, and that's the time and leadership time and attention that I'm talking about. And then we have one for a longer term security, which is on Wednesday afternoon, like a plan review. I also review my security tickets on an ongoing basis. Jenny has been really helpful to summarize these for me. And then you can see I keep a Slack channel of, would be a really bad week with 5, of ongoing security issues. And so they all get a Slack channel, put the right people together and whatnot.
And I think, I know that we're throwing a lot at you, and we have a very robust culture, but you don't have to do all these things. Just start with one.
You don't. It's
You
a
really
little,
don't.
let's give ourselves a little reality check.
Well, and I think, the reality is all those things are done. They're not done to perfection. Like every doc that's written, we don't over-index on how was it written. We over-index on what are we talking about and what are we fixing. And that, I think the Slack channels help with that too, because it allows people of all different levels asking different questions and getting caught up on things. So
yeah, and it doesn't happen on day one. I've had a lot of people come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, my team, they can't do all of this. And it's like, you have to chip away at it little by little. So if you put your pickles hat on, like when I bought him, he only went backwards, and as a horse, that's like not normal. And then he kind of got okay with water, and then he started jumping things, and he started jumping fancy things. So you need to invest in the elements of this flywheel. You can literally just pick, we're gonna start celebrating when people self-identify. We're gonna have a common ticket with a bunch of questions for them to assess the risk really quickly. It just starts small and keep adding, and this is how AWS got there. I joined 11 years ago now. It was not this robust at all. It was, and we've gotten better over time. So where can you start? Number one, if you're a leader, and this is one message I just want to really drive home. I had a new organization, joined my organization about a year ago, so cultures were a little bit different. The number one thing I did when it came to security was ask, what is the risk? What is the risk? And people would get used to pinging me and saying, and I told them I want to know about every security risk, and I want to know what the risk is. I don't ask for the solution. I don't ask for the timeline. I ask about the risk, right? And then you can ask, hey, do we have the right people involved and all that sort of stuff. Now my team sends me the ticket saying, we cut the security ticket, here's the risk, and it's in the ticket. That's very convenient, and as a leader. I do track action items, so this is something you can do. You can do this in any type of written format that you use in your company. We use words, like Word docs and memos, PowerPoint, tracking system, there's a ton of them out there, but track your action items to completion for your security risk. If you are a leader, the number one thing I hear from engineers is my leaders don't care about security when they're talking to me about security. You have to foster this culture. You have to bring engineering together, security together, business leaders together. If you are an engineer in the room and you're like, my leaders don't care about security culture, guess what? In about, I don't know, a week, 24 hours, there'll be a YouTube video of this talk. And you can be like, hey, look, use this YouTube, listen to this talk, and we have to foster this in our organization. Celebrate, you gotta celebrate reporting and fixing security issues. Security topics can be a little grim sometimes, a little sad, but you gotta keep it light, gotta keep it happy, celebrate the things, and then try to bring those security-focused individuals. Now, you might need some tooling. We do have it. These are things that we've brought along in AWS. So you saw the screenshot of the security tracker, right? And these are editable. They have clear owners. They have clear action items. They have clear risks. Knowledge base, this can be a wiki. This can just be anything common where people who've learned through a security issue, remember you're using the security issues to drive that systemic change. We add it back to the knowledge base. We add the solutions. We add the problems, how to identify it. Scanning tools can help. Try to get them in the hands of engineers as much as possible. And the number one thing you want to be able to do is that any engineer or anybody in the company who identifies a security issue can escalate it. It's boring, they know what's going to happen, and they're bringing in the right people. One thing that Eric Brandwein has been really vocal about is that our security teams are around the clock. They follow the sun, so you're never pulling somebody out of bed. And that's really nice. So when an engineer does cut a security Sev2, and it is going to be a long haul to fix it and all the things, we have the right support that is allocated for that.
And you have to really consistently go back to say, why wasn't this reported sooner? when could this have been reported? I even actually just on Friday afternoon had an email come through at like 8 p.m. on Friday to my team and saying like, hey, if I'm an engineer, saying, hey, I have this issue, like, can I have someone on your team like help me look into it? And of course, I didn't read it until Saturday morning. And the first thing I did is like, why hasn't this already been reported? And luckily, someone on my team messaged me and said, I responded back immediately and said, report it. So like, even us, like we still have that happen, and engineers are new, so you just have to like consistently reinforce that. And if you are a security person in the room, and I know that some of you are, do not be the one that goes and reports it for them. Don't do that. That doesn't add value. That's not your job. Like that is their job to report it. Then you can come in and support the next steps, but like really try and encourage that the engineers own reporting it. Yeah.
So if you do all that, what type of culture will you bring to life? And so as an engineering leader, I would want everyone contributing to identifying security risks.
And so how that would come to life is that they would consistently know where they're going to report it and how to report it. You would give them a standard template for them to use so that they know exactly what information that they're going to need, and it'll drive this repetition of here are the things I need to look out for and be ready to report when I find something.
Yeah, and as a leader, I want to know about the security risks, and I want to know what the next steps are to address them or to chip away at them. And I don't want to be, I need to know about them, right? You want to know that about your system. I do not want to be surprised. I know. So we like leaders to be aware of them, and so how do we foster that?
So you need a regular, consistent mechanism for your leaders to review, and you need them to show up. So if you're going to go back and you're going to say, I want to set up this weekly security meeting, and your leadership says, okay, great, you say, I want to make sure that you are always at that weekly security meeting. Clear your calendar at that time, or let's not just go and pretend we have one and you come for the first 3 weeks. So set that expectation up front. I think that's really important. I've had conversations with people over the past year where their leader wasn't showing up, and it's that's a conversation that you need to have with them so that it really is in a mechanism that does what you need it to do.
Leadership, time, and attention, it works. We want our engineering teams prioritizing the security improvements over time, so you're constantly raising that bar, and this helps with the action items that we talked about. That's how they come to life. And then security clearly communicates security best practices. And I'll just kind of jump in here. One thing that our teams have been really good, our security teams have been really fascinated is yes, they communicate all the expectations of how to do security right. But in AWS, they're taking it a step further, and what they're doing is they're saying this year or for this quarter, we're going to focus on removing access to trimming down access to our production systems, or we're going to work on cleaning up our logging, right? And by putting an intentional time and focus on a certain topic, you actually move the needle, rather than security being do all the things, get them done now. That doesn't help anybody. So prioritizing and choosing what theme to go after has been really, really helpful from AWS's security.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most difficult parts of implementing any of these mechanisms is there's a lot that can be done. And, we would all love for all of our security risks to be taken, in a way that reduces the likelihood of them ever surfacing again. But the reality is there will always be risk. And so it's being able to facilitate the right conversation to decide what the right trade-offs are and the right level of investment.
And there will always be a security backlog, right? And at Amazon, we say security is priority 0. And I actually have a lot of engineers on my team come and be well, then we should drop our entire roadmap and just do security features, right? And so this is where the risk and the business need and how you balance it, and are there other mitigations in place and whatnot. And so it is. That's why you need leaders involved. It's why you need engineers involved. It's why you need security involved, because it's a combination of all those three that make the right decisions.
Yeah, I even had a software development manager come to me last week saying, oh, well, I don't want to go to the weekly security meeting because then I know I'm going to have to drop everything and we're going to have to go and fix this whole issue. And I was that's not the outcome that we're looking for from this meeting. The outcome is making sure that we have the proper discussion around what is the right thing to do for customers and what's the right way to address it, and having leaders in the room so that they don't have to corral the leaders to determine what the right investment is.
The best is when you show up at that meeting and then somebody gives you a simplified solution that's a lot easier and you get a bang for your buck. So sometimes that happens. It's exciting. All right. So rounding this out, what to take back to your teams. Security is everyone's job. You don't get to say, no, that's security. They'll just fix it. Security is everyone's job. Celebrate security-first behaviors. This is how you drive culture of anything you want. Make reporting security issues boring, predictable and boring, and then use security issues to drive systemic change and tooling. This is where the flywheel actually completes. I think we're out of time. We'll probably be around if you want to chat. I'm happy to chat about security culture at any point in time. Thanks, everybody,
for coming.